Massachusetts Secretary of State Bill Galvin is our guest. Let's go on the record. Fresh off his 8th victory at the ballot box, the Secretary of the Commonwealth looks over an evolving election landscape. The lessons learned, the challenges ahead. The Democrat from Brighton is here to talk it through.
From WCVB Channel 5, the inside word from Washington to Beacon Hill. Today's newsmakers are going on the record.
Welcome to OTR. I'm Janet Wu, along with News Center 5 political reporter Sharmin Siketti. Bill Galvin is with us this morning. He has served as Secretary of State since 1995, winning an 8th term in November, a member of the state legislature from 1975 to 1991. He's a native of Brighton and holds degrees from Boston College and Suffolk Law School. Thank you for being here.
Great to be with you.
And we are very close to the holiday season, so Merry Christmas. I'll say that ahead of time.
I'll accept it gratefully.
Okay.
Welcome. Let's start out with that important 51st seat in the U.S. Senate this week, Democrat Raphael Warnock's victory in Georgia. Tell us what your takeaways were about that and how the vote was counted.
Well, I think, first of all, it was a remarkable turnout. I think it's quite obvious that Senator Warnock's victory was contributed to greatly by the additional opportunities to vote. As you may know, the Democrats did go to court seeking an extra day of early voting. Vote by mail was also available to some degree. It varies from state to state. But I think what it proves is when voters have the opportunity to vote, they will participate. And I think that's the takeaway. And I think it also, from the Republican point of view, I think they have to accept that these changes are permanent, and if they're going to compete in the future, and I think they've said that, some of them have anyways, they're going to have to ignore what Trump has said about it in the past and vote by mail or take any opportunity they can to vote.
Well, do you think they should change some of their state laws that were put in place previously?
Well,
that
obviously,
criticize, of course.
Yeah, there were restrictions placed on voting, and many of us spoke against them because we've tried to have it as we have in Massachusetts, as broad as possible. But I think they still had and did have the opportunity to vote early, and I think that made a difference. So what it says is, and we saw it here in Massachusetts also, people want that opportunity. There shouldn't have to be extra reasons why you can't vote. There shouldn't have to be that difficulty in voting. We made it easier here. I think it's been very successful here, and I think the rest of the country is seeing that too.
Now, you talk to other Secretary of States regularly. You're involved in there's an organization, right, but you've been doing this for so long, you know them personally. Do you see more tightening of voting rights, like especially perhaps in other states like down south or further out west in the more, shall I say, red states?
Well, I think the most significant thing coming out of the 2022 election cycle is I think that the voters have repudiated the stolen election narrative, the false narrative of Trump and his group, not just here in Massachusetts and New England, but everywhere. I think people, including Republicans, obviously many of them won. So if the system was so bad, well, how did they win? And I think reality is sort of dawning on people. So I'm hoping that going forward, people will be judging election issues, not so much from a strategic point of view or a tactical point of view, or certainly not from the one of some sort of a past stolen election that didn't happen, but really what works for voters, because elections should be about voters. They shouldn't be about candidates or parties or anything. It should be about voters.
There's been some talk that the Republicans are sort of like reassessing their opposition to mail-in voting after this Georgia race. Do you think that has affected it?
Yes, absolutely. I think it's everything. It's not just the Georgia race. I think it's other races around the country. I mean, even here in Massachusetts, Republicans participated in early voting by mail in particular at a much lower level. Democrats voted at a higher level. We did have a significant Republican participation, but percentage-wise, it was lower significantly than the Democrats. So I think Republicans, whatever the resistance in the past, they have to overcome it if they're going to compete, because just like Democratic and independent voters, and I guess the other big takeaway for me in this election is the significance of independence, certainly here in Massachusetts, but everywhere. Increasingly, people are not choosing to identify with parties. In Massachusetts, we now are less than 30% of Democratic enrollment, first time in a long time, and Republicans are not even 10. So most people here and around the country, I think, are choosing to be unaffiliated with any major party and vote, which reinforces the idea that people should have the right to vote as any way they can and should participate in primaries or any other way they can, because voters are voters and they should have the right to vote as citizens.
All right, let's move to the millionaire's tax. You just signed and certified question 1, and that tax was the most controversial ballot question.
Yes, and the closest.
This year, yeah, it certainly was. Well, while you have no power to carve out any exceptions to that law, you have proposed
Yes.
to. Why is that?
I propose, first of all, that the money coming from it should be put in a trust fund so we know exactly what the proceeds amount to for education and transportation, but particularly for education, because there you're going to have municipalities in the spring having to make decisions about education. That's how it was sold to voters, that it was for education and transportation. I think we have to make good on that commitment. Secondly, I'm concerned about the plight of homeowners with their primary residence, especially long-time homeowners who have as their principal asset their home, which may have appreciated greatly and may suddenly be captured by this tax. I'm not saying they shouldn't pay something on the profit, indeed a lot, but I do think we should have some opportunity for an amendment or a deduction for long-term homeowners, especially elderly homeowners who are income qualified otherwise. I mean, they're not millionaires. Their one-time windfall is very different than an annual income that's $1 million or more. And I strongly suggest the legislature should consider that kind of specific deduction being created. In addition to the benefit to the individual homeowners, you know, we know, and I run the registries of deeds in most of Massachusetts, that many older homeowners are reluctant to sell at this particular time in the market because of interest rates and other reasons. But obviously, if they're going to have an additional tax, it's going to make it less likely they're going to bring their home into the marketplace, which is going to contribute further to our housing problem.
Which is a problem right now.
It is a
There's
great
not
problem.
enough out there. It'll be interesting to see how it plays out politically, especially the trust fund part of it. But I want to ask you about question 2. You signed a bill certifying question 2,
Right.
which was passed by the voters last month. It ostensibly will lower dental bills. At least that's what the proponents sold it as. How confident are you, just as, you know, a consumer, that that will actually happen?
I think it depends on the enforcement. The enforcement is going to be up to the Commissioner of Insurance. It's going to be certainly out there. I think the proposal, which was overwhelmingly adopted, basically said the proceeds that are paid by the consumers into the insurance should be paid out as benefits. And that's the question, is the Commissioner of Insurance going to enforce it? That one doesn't actually take effect till 2024. Because it's going to take a year to put that together. But I think it's obvious the dentists mobilize very effectively, and they mobilize their patients. And I think there's a demand here that people get the benefit of paying for insurance.
All right, here in Massachusetts, 2.5 million ballots, they were cast a month ago. About a third of those were mailed in, but more than 11,000 were rejected. Can you explain the main reasons 11,000 ballots were rejected?
The biggest reason was they were received late, despite the fact that they had 3 extra days in the general election that we didn't have in the primary. You can't bring them in late. And the second reason was, second most common reason was they weren't signed. So there was no signature on it. You couldn't identify who they came from. Or and the third one, they didn't have an envelope at all. So, I mean, essentially, it's unfortunate that any voter didn't get counted. But if they come in late, just like not showing up on election day, but showing up the day after to try to vote after the election's over, you can't operate like that.
Is there anything else that could be done to potentially shrink that possibility?
Well, we did do something when we authorized the counting in the election of 3 additional days. I constantly say don't mail it if it's getting close to the election, use the drop boxes. I mean, we're going to continue to go over our practices to see if there's some way. We want people to vote. We want to count the people that do vote. But obviously we have to abide by the rules.
The U.S. Supreme Court will soon decide a major gerrymandering case in North Carolina. The crux of it is essentially whether state legislatures can redraw districts that potentially violate their own state constitution. You happen to be a lawyer as well as Secretary of State. Where do you stand on this issue? Do you think that you could see the Supreme Court? What direction should they go?
Well, I hope the Supreme Court does not take away the right of review from state courts. State courts know their states best, and it's actually broader than just redistricting. It's election laws when it comes to the federal elections in general. So I think in listening to the arguments the other day, it appears that the 3 most conservative judges, of course, they're for the legislatures, or North Carolina in this case. The 3 most liberal justices are opposed to it, and the 3 that probably hold the decision, which is the Chief and Kavanaugh and Barrett, appear to be trying to find a middle ground. So I'm guessing that's where it's going to end up. But I think the right of courts to review election laws in their own state is certainly fundamental. The legislature is not in a unique position. And in fact, the history here in terms of including what started right here in Massachusetts, we all know where gerrymandering first occurred, or gerrymandering as it was known, is here. So saying to the legislature, oh, they'll do a great job, we'll trust them, I wouldn't do that.
Could you imagine the political nightmare that would happen if the Supreme Court rules in the opposite direction, saying that the legislatures can do whatever
they want?
Yeah.
Well, we saw in New York State where the Republicans challenged successfully. Right. So it's very significant. I hope that, and as I said, it's election laws in general. I think the right of citizens to go to the courts when there's issues relating to elections is a very important one.